That reminds me, earlier this year I was writing about the guy who claimed there was a pedophile conspiracy based on the southwest side of town at a Cemex property. It was a wacky conspiracy, but one of the things that brought up is when you're talking about all the different information sources, this guy just came up with a crazy idea either because he is a little off or because he saw an opportunity to get money or attention, and he could do it on his own. So this story I'm talking about took place here in Tucson just this summer. He was investigating a homeless site and claimed that he found evidence of a pedophile camp. And the fact that people rejected his story and said it was not true had no salience, because he could go on Facebook Live and, being a very charismatic person, garner an audience that would rival something that a local TV station would have on any given evening, and create his own media, his own story. And the people who want to believe that are going to doubt anyone who puts up even facts to the counter. And one thing that really jumped out at me here, I don't know if you noticed it too, is this whole thing about false press leaks. Are we being set up? And my goodness, it really struck me that isn't that what's going on a lot now? This question of are they making things? Donald Trump accusing the news media of making things up, and then maybe the Trump administration actually for example, the video the other day of Jim Acosta.
Right, the doctored video that made it look like he was chopping
more
aggressively than actually occurred.
Yeah, so I mean, now we're back in a whole new, different era of people making stuff up. But at least we can take some comfort from the fact that, I don't know, we've been through it before, and we'll probably get through it again.
Yeah, and I do think we are seeing evidence that the Russians, that Putin is very interested in exploiting these differences in the country right now, the divisions in this country, seems to me.
Oh yeah, and yeah, I mean,
and not just here, but throughout the West.
Right, and it's the downside of our democratized information age, where everyone is able to create memes or other modes of communication via Facebook and all the other media that we have out there.
One of the things I thought was interesting early on in the movie, where people are saying, "Oh, I've seen your stories out there," and they want to start talking to them. And one of the things I've early learned as a journalist was sometimes you can write an innocuous story and put it out there when you suspect there's more to it, and then people will reach out to you. I don't know if that's been your experience or not, but it's been a useful thing for me from time to time. Magicians don't like to reveal their secrets or anything like that,
Right.
But that is something that we do from time to time to try to get people to come talk to us, and it's worked certainly for me.
Yeah, it's like chum in the water. You try to just signal to the world, hey, I'm looking for something here, and sometimes it's good to do it, and other times you want to hold back because you don't want to let anyone else know. Although these days, competition, it's nothing like it was. You see the competition in this movie. They're just tearing their hair out over what the New York Times or someone else has. And even when I first arrived here in 1997, when I arrived, the first day I arrived here, the weekly had come out that day. This was for an interview, and the editors who were taking me out to lunch were anxiously grabbing the weekly to see what was in the skinny section about the people with the star. So it's strange that the population is much bigger, and yet we don't have that kind of either competition or interaction in our publication or in our news media in general locally. I think the way we used to.
I also think the scandal level, like the acceptance of scandal, has grown in many ways. Like you saw some of the scandals that are surrounding the president himself. The fact he's paying hush money to women right before the election. The things that were going on with Scott Pruitt as the EPA director, things that were going on with Ryan Zinke as the Interior. And Pruitt, of course, is gone now. But it seems like the acceptance of scandal is a lot broader. I don't know, is that your impression as well at this point?
Yeah, so I think this gets to something about Watergate and this book and movie. That it kind of opened a whole new era. I mean, I think the movie especially broke open a different expectation maybe of what journalists do, that what they do is uncover, what we do is uncover scandals. And maybe it feels like maybe either it feels like if we're not doing that, it's a waste of time, or that people have become so used to scandals that that we're inured to it. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. I think the amount of pressure that has to grow over a scandal is greater today than it has been.
Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah,
it's a lot harder to dislodge people. Things that would have ended political careers before, or government careers before, seem to be it's a higher hurdle, I guess.
Yeah.
And I also think one of the things that this movie, and I want to get to questions from the audience here in just a moment, but I think one of the things that Watergate did, and I was a very small child when all this was going on, but it really seemed to be the start of a lot of erosion of trust in our institutions, and I think that process has definitely accelerated in recent years.
Yeah. What the scene where the editor says, what does he say? You know, this is about this country. It's about he's kind of offended at at their own reporting of what it means. And man, you would never find that really right now or anymore. It would just be, let's jump on the story. If it means overturning the president of the United States, great, let's do it. You know.
Right, and I also think on the part of like the election stuff that is coming out in Arizona, where the ballot counting, took a little bit of time, and all of a sudden you have a lot of Republican officials claiming that this election is being stolen.
Yeah, that's a good comparison, actually. Yeah.
And you wrote about that in terms of the basically the falsehoods.
Yeah, so
it's
funny how nowadays the lack of a scandal can be almost more noticeable. Like in this case, it was people were saying there's fraud going on because the ballot counting was taking so long, and the fact that it probably was not fraudulent, or there's no sign of fraud, no evidence that we know of in Arizona. That's a story. Strangely.
All right, let's throw it open to the audience because there's a lot going on these days, and I'm sure you guys may have questions. So is there a mic in the audience too, Jeff, or how do we do this? Speak loudly, Jeff advises.
We'll repeat the question if we can hear it.
Yeah.
I would just like to, first of all, it's wonderful to hear you speak. I think one of the things that I would like to hear you talk about is the way that the press was part of the reason why Donald Trump was elected. I mean, there was a way, I was very engaged, and I realized that he got all this time from the press, but the thing about it is that nobody talks about that. So of course, there's no trust, because you really don't know who to trust. So I would just like to hear you speak about that.
You want to repeat the question? Yeah, the comment was basically that the press helped make Donald Trump, and correct me if I'm wrong, and therefore, there's a reason that people wouldn't trust the press. You're talking about the press, right?
Yeah, I'm talking about the press. I'm talking about CNN. I remember, I was very engaged. I remember what he said.
Yeah.
He said, well, this might not be good for the country, but this is good for us. We're making a lot of money. And so, in terms of other candidates that were really there, they just didn't get it.
Right. So it's obviously true that Donald Trump, one thing he is a master of is manipulation of news coverage and marketing himself through that. I would say that you're right, he got a ton of time on cable TV. I would say also he was very critically covered both on TV and in the print press. So I don't know, how would we leave that assessment?
Well, I think the other part of the question is how do you know who to trust?
Yeah.
And I think that comes down to, look at your news sources and what kind of sourcing are they doing? Are they actually talking to legitimate sources, or are they making stuff up? I mean, that's an individual decision that everybody has to make in terms of which news sources they're going to believe in. I do think there is a problem with the press in terms of this last presidential election, because you had teams of reporters, for example, you had teams of reporters from the New York Times who were reporting on Hillary Clinton, and then you had teams of reporters who were reporting on Donald Trump. And, you know, both teams are going to try to make as much as they can, but while Trump is an outrage machine saying thing after thing after thing that, you know, riles people up, you know, the thing that they have on Clinton is the email. So you have the same, another group of reporters who need to find something to write about with Hillary Clinton, so they write about emails and emails and emails and emails. And I don't think the two things that we saw unfolding were at all in terms of parallel importance, rising to the same level of scandal or misbehavior or whatever you want to call it. But nonetheless, that's how it plays out in the pages of the New York Times. And I think that's something that is not an easy riddle to solve for the media, quite honestly.
Just one quick thing, easy way to check whether a outlet or a news story is trustworthy is whether they correct errors. You will find, you know, there's so many different news outlets these days, or people that just pop up at the internet and call themselves a news outlet. That's one way that's easy to know if you can figure out if they correct errors. Anyway, let's move on to the next.
Oh, I have that here in the front row here. Yeah.
Recently, last week, Jim Acosta was denied his press credentials by the White House, in my opinion. Probably Trump told his press secretary to zap him. Thereafter, CNN filed a lawsuit resulting in a temporary injunction being issued requiring the White House to reissue Mr. Acosta his press credentials, and he withheld, that is, the judge withheld the ultimate issue of whether or not the First Amendment would come into play as far as allowing Mr. Acosta to remain and asking those vigorous questions without repercussions from the White House. But however, on the other side, you got to have some kind of decorum, appropriate behavior. What's your view about how that issue may ultimately pan out and how it should pan out?
So the question is basically about the White House's decision to revoke Jim Acosta's press privileges, and then how that may ultimately play out now that he's been temporarily reinstated. And it's my understanding that the judge that ruled on this said that they denied him due process, that once you've let somebody in, you can't just go ahead and deny it. There's certainly a need for decorum, although I'm not sure the current occupant of the White House is exactly a master of that. And I would say that I don't know how the whole thing's going to play out. I am not a constitutional lawyer or anything like that. I think it's good that it's been reinstated. They say you have to have some sort of form of due process in order for this to play out. I think ultimately Trump depends on CNN as much as CNN depends upon Trump. It's a very symbiotic relationship, and that he is not going to want to have CNN not talking about him. So I assume that this is going to end with him being back on a permanent basis.
There's just one thing a connection I want to make to this movie, which is how the Trump White House has, of course, targeted CNN and Acosta specifically. And back in these days, in this period, it was the Washington Post. I think more than anybody else, there are, in the book, there's numerous incidents where Ron Ziegler, the press secretary, and others are just bashing the Post for the inaccuracy of their reporting and calling them out, calling them elitists, calling them, very similar labeling, saying that the real America doesn't care about what they say, that kind of thing. Very similar to what you see today.
Over here, behind? Yeah, Matt.
I find it hard to fathom in a 21st century that we have all sorts of different ways for to register people to vote. And what can we, the people, do to come under one thing? Like Oregon, for example, has, once you turn 18, you're registered to vote. That's so easy and simple. Why, I know why states won't, especially red states, won't adopt that thing because they'll lose. But is there anything that we, the people, can do to get something that, no hanging chads, no, you know, all these problems that we're having?
Well, that's generally a state-to-state. So the question is, basically, what can we do to try to eliminate barriers to allowing people to vote? And was it Oregon you mentioned that you just automatically get a right to vote if you're 18? I would say, you know, it is a state-to-state thing. So it depends on what state you're living in. And I would say Arizona actually has surprisingly low barriers to voting, especially with our massive vote by mail. I would also say that it's a matter of keeping an eye on what happens at the state legislature, and you're going to see in this next session a real push to not allow a lot of these early ballots to get counted or some kind of arbitrary cutoff on the early ballots, and that's something that I'm sure Tim and I will both be keeping an eye on as the legislation moves through, but you're going to see a lot of efforts to change our voting laws as a result of this election. Over here.
Just a clarification
Oh,
on
sorry.
voting in Arizona. The legislature's rule against what they call ballot harvesting has created a significant barrier to voting on all of the reservations across the state.
Yeah, you are okay. Just to clarify, the gentleman said that one of the things that has actually put a block in the way of voting is the fact that the Republicans call it ballot harvesting, the Democrats call it ballot collection. Basically, until this last election cycle, activist groups could go out and collect early ballots from people and turn them in. And certainly the reservations are a place where it's very difficult both to campaign and to get the turnout on the vote simply by the nature of how spread out they are and other factors that play into, you know, the difficulty of reaching out to the different communities on the reservation. And that is true, that the ballot harvesting has made it more difficult for some, or the laws against ballot collection have made it more difficult for people to turn out to vote. That is true.
Let's get this woman who's gonna.
Oh, yes, yeah, I'm sorry.
So you identified the symbiosis between candidates and the news media, and to my mind that's a structural industrial problem, right? You don't have to report about Clinton's emails if there's no justification, but people chose to do that because it sold papers. So do you think there's a serious discussion going on about a criteria of whether this should be reported or whether this is a non-starter, and a serious debate about the ethics of being a journalist right now?
The question is, you know, calling back to what I mentioned about the Times having, you know, one crew of reporters following Hillary Clinton and one crew of reporters following Donald Trump, and the kind of the asymmetry between those two particular scandals, and whether or not, well, you have to keep in mind that the media is not a monolithic organization. Like, every newsroom has its own way of approaching things. I'm sure there's a lot of discussion in a lot of newsrooms about how to cover this, but part of the thing is it's not so much that reporters want to sell newspapers, the reporters want to get good stories. That's what's driving them, and as a result, they're going to try to dig into whatever they can dig into because that's their job, essentially, to try to you know, tackle the stuff that they think is going to get the most is going to be the most important thing to cover about candidate A or candidate B. I suspect there's plenty of newsrooms that are searching their souls on many different topics these days, particularly the whole issue of fake news and discrediting and sort of the diminishing impact of the media, and that's all happening as we speak. But I don't think most newsrooms are viewing it as a matter of we want to help this political party or we want to help that political party. I don't think that would be part of the conversation in most newsrooms.
Just want to make a quick defense of selling papers. I know this is probably what you meant, but you know, that is what we do. You know, it's a business, and so the idea is that if you're really good and really relevant, and really interesting, you sell papers, and that's a good thing. But I wouldn't. And also news judgment. I mean, news judgment is just, it varies from paper to paper, individual to individual, outlet to outlet. But these days, it's harder than ever to fight pressure from interest groups that their story is the one to cover, and because with the diminishment of the power of our organizations in the society, these outside groups have much expanded power and make a really concerted effort to work the refs, as they say. We up here being the refs. And so it's hard sometimes to resist what people call false balance. You know, that is taking, say, the email story and comparing it up against whatever Donald Trump's scandal of the moment was. Anyway, we'll quit at that.
Oh, way in the back there.
During the presidential campaign, Chuck Todd came out with the comment that it wasn't a journalist's job to determine the truth. And I heard that, and I'm thinking, if it isn't a journalist's job to determine the truth, present the truth, isn't he being a propagandist? What's your thought on that? What is the role of a journalist?
I think that's pretty simple. Yes.
Repeat the question.
The question is, isn't that you quoted Chuck Todd saying the journalist's job isn't to determine the truth. I think the idea is that he was saying the job is to present the information fairly or something like that. And anyway, yeah, I mean, I think obviously the job is to pursue the truth. However, getting there often takes considering lots of alternative explanations. As you can see, some of the time in the movie, you know, they get carried away. Especially Bernstein gets carried away with his feelings about what the meaning of these things are, and it's really important, obviously, to check your feelings against someone else's point of view, and that way get to the truth. That's the way I'd put it.
And there's a lot of different forms that journalism takes. Tim and I write columns. You know, we write reported columns. We go out and we ask questions and gather information, but we are not doing straight up he said, she said journalism. That's not our particular bag, but that is an important part of what journalists do. However, you shouldn't let he said, she lied be like treated equally in a story, I would say. Yes.
Way back up there in the aisle.
I was glad to hear the movie mentioned. I heard 15 minutes. What was the guys that you guys, when you first saw this movie, I realized that probably not when it first came out, but what was your reaction to people around you and your looking back on it? How many times have you seen it? Did you read the book prior to that? Did you read every article they put out years prior to that?
So Jim and I are both, I think, about the same age, so I was too young to know what was going on at this time. Although, you know, I think I saw it pretty young, and just read the book, just saw the movie twice, and it's just such a trip back. It's such a period piece now, you know, as everything gets old at some point, and so it's a really good movie, you know. It's an excellent movie about the relationship between the two, and then the greater pressures on the newsroom and the story. And I'm not really exactly answering your question, but you want to elaborate any more?
Had you read the nonfiction book?
Yeah. Let me.
Articles, did you see it as it was happening?
No, but I just read the book, and it's really interesting to see that the screenplay. I'm sorry. The book was written for a screenplay, i.e. they were trying to get a movie before the story was even done. I believe, now somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, that one of the reasons they got the thing wrong about Hugh Sloan, I can't look through the book to find it for you right now, but is that they were having a meeting with their book publisher the next day, and they had to decide whether to check, meet back again with Sloan and check something, or so this interfered with their reporting, actually, ironically.
I was, I think, 8 years old when the president resigned, so I think I was probably watching a lot more Scooby-Doo than reading the Washington Post in those days. I saw the movie probably, I can't recall the first time I saw it. I was, it would have had been in the age of VCRs. I was probably in college by the time I actually saw the movie and read the book. But I found both to be, a really engrossing history of these times, although, obviously they had to take some liberties in how they present things on screen, as they always do. But I thought a terrific movie for sure, and a terrific book, and inspirational in many ways. Okay, here we go.
Could you talk about the phenomena of false equivalence in the media?
The question was, could we talk about the idea of false equivalence? I think that's what I was addressing to a certain extent just now. That is, if you get both sides or all sides of a story, then you've done your job and you're done. And so I think, as the woman was pointing to, or someone was pointing to back here, the man talked about, Chuck Todd, your job really isn't done when you get both sides. There is a lot of that these days, but I think also as an industry where Donald Trump has really forced people to reconsider their, think a little deeper about their objective, and rededicate a little bit more to finding the answer as opposed to just getting both sides.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, I think false equivalence is a problem where you're saying both sides' perspective is equally valid if one side's lying. It's not.
Yeah.
It's not legit. Yes.
So, following up on the same concept, that one of the big issues in journalism seems to be this false equivalence and stuff. And it seems like a lot of journalism today is handling that issue really badly when one side is bullshit, whether it's politics or climate change, something like that. So what is the more sophisticated answer to how you handle a story that way that does not give false balance to the bullshit side?
Well, I try to, if somebody's bullshitting me, I try to point out where they're wrong. The larger problem is that there is a significant sector of the population that is going to not believe you no matter how much evidence you present. And that is more about your readership or the audience than it is about reporters, I think. I think we do our best, or at least I do my best, to not repeat obvious falsehoods or without saying, hey, this is what somebody said and this is the evidence that what they're saying is not true.
And in the reporting process, it's just, liberating once you learn to tell somebody that you have, either that you think they're lying. I mean, I don't think I ever phrase it that way, but that you have totally contradictory information. Confront people with the alternatives, and that gets you that much closer to the truth. Because it's shocking how sometimes people do have answers that you hadn't thought of before.
And it's important to at least try to get another side of the story when you go interview somebody, because you may be on the wrong track as a journalist. You may find out by asking questions that there's a lot more to the story, or that there's a more interesting story that you didn't even realize was out there, and that's what you end up pursuing. But I just think that making sure that you check what people are telling you and find some kind of evidence is the basic part of the job.
On that score, one of the latest developments in the last 2 years since we've had this White House is the so-called fact-checking. Now, fact-checking is done by a lot of the media outlets that I respect, but it doesn't seem to have much effect. It doesn't seem to be drawing much water. Can you comment on that?
Sure. So the question was, he was pointing out that there's there's a lot of fact checking out there, but that it doesn't seem to have a lot of effect on the debate. And yeah, it has been going on a lot further back than just the last couple of years. But the fact checker, Snopes, for example, online is a famous site for fact checking or for debunking falsehoods. Well, you know, some conservatives have built up a case that Snopes itself is biased, or PolitiFact is biased. You know, it's all, there's always going to be someone saying the fact check is wrong. I've seen that numerous times with the Arizona Republic, that they do a fact check and then people attack the fact check. So while I would love the fact check to be, you know, the final answer, people will not let it be these days.
How about over here?
With all of the agencies that had normally been charged to gather the facts and gather the data about their particular mission statements, such as the EPA and the Department of Education, not having had their first off having their budgets gutted, but then also having their actual reporting capabilities being hampered by the new heads of the agencies. How has that been hindering the media in being able to report on actually what is happening at the highest levels and throughout our nation?
So the question is, how has the Trump administration's efforts to clamp down on the collection and dissemination of data by various government agencies affecting the reporting about those agencies and the issues that those agencies deal with? And Tim, you want to tackle that one?
Yeah, I'll try, but this movie really made me think about how this access question. It's interesting how, you know, the fact that Carl Bernstein could call up, was it Bernstein or Woodward? Bernstein calls up the White House library and talks to the librarian. I mean, forget the fact that she changes her story and all that. Just the fact of being able to reach the librarian is something that, you know, would never happen today. So, strangely, it's exactly, well, I don't know if it's ironic, but anyway, it's exactly what we need now. You know, it's because so many, there's such a clampdown on information, like as you're talking about. It's increasingly necessary to have these whistleblowers, and it's something like, you know, some of the bigger outlets have all kinds of different anonymous ways to submit information. I forget the names of all those. So, I mean, I think there's a recognition of the need, but it's because we're at a time where it's so hard to get, you know, Jim and I are not going to be able to get someone and call someone in a federal bureaucracy, let's say Border Patrol or whatever, and just ask them a question and get them to answer. You know, obviously, we might be able to get a little conversation that would be off the record, but you know, we're going to be routed through spokespeople. So anyway, the point is whistleblowing becomes more necessary, and this ability to get and find people, sources of the bureaucracy, also becomes more important. But I think there's a willingness to talk that builds when the truth is being suppressed or when information is being suppressed.
Yeah, you really are only as good as your sources in this business. Over here?
Yeah, so in the movie, I was surprised at how loose maybe the confirmations were and what have you. So I'm wondering, is that something that individual journalists choose? Is it a newsroom that sets a standard or what have you?
The question is about the confirmation process in this movie, and how whether there's a standardized way of deciding whether information is adequately confirmed. And in my experience, first of all, you know, I don't have experience at these levels of journalism or politics, but I can't imagine going with stories the way they did. You know, that I mean, obviously the counting example is the most extreme one. But you know, we rarely are even allowed to use anonymous sources. I mean, you can talk to people off the record, then you have to go find a way to confirm the information on the record. And that's generally the way it works. So this whole thing, it may be the way it has worked, and it may be the way it works in some ways now because, you know, you see a lot of news reporting from Washington being from unnamed sources. But man, in my experience, this has nothing to do with reality.
Oh, over here in the black? Yeah.
Speaking of anonymous, I'm quite fascinated by that article that was written by somebody in the White House about they're watching him. Why hasn't that been followed up?
You're talking about the op-ed that was in the New York Times?
Yeah,
The question is about why has there not been more follow-up on that op-ed in the New York Times, which actually it was Trump himself who wrote it, just so you know. Just kidding. I think it's because there's been about 75 scandals since then that have distracted us or not us, it's distracted the national media in a lot of ways.
Yeah, honestly, it was interesting, but it kind of reminds me of Jeff Flake's statements in a way. Kind of like, so, you know, and what are we supposed to do with this? You know, that's why I would say it kind of lost its.
It sounds like there's a bigger story there.
Yeah.
Though. I mean, a really big story. Like somebody's not loyal.
Oh well, that's for sure. Yeah.
That's a big story.
I think there's a lot of that going on in Washington right now in terms of loyalty and questioning loyalty and that kind of thing. Way in the back in the red there, yeah.
Well, one of the things that again occurred to me, I'm old enough to remember Watergate stuff. One of the things that occurred to me watching the movie was kind of these reporters were a little naive when they start out, and suddenly they find themselves in the midst of this overwhelming story, and their lives may be on the line. And I think that's a thing we don't deal with as much in this country, but journalists all over the world with their lives on the line to get stories, and you know, I just think it's getting perhaps a little more dangerous now. I mean, there was a bombing, there was at the newspaper office recently.
The shooting.
The shooting, thank you.
Yeah, in Annapolis.
The shooting of the newspaper office. And I think, you know, we're kind of moving towards that in this country, whereas in other countries it's kind of a factor of life for many journalists. Can you address the personal and the kind of media risks that go along? I mean, they're trying to shut down, you know, any of these stories, and what extent would they go to do that?
So the question was about risks, safety risks in journalism, in comparing our country now to other countries or our country then, and obviously the other countries such as Mexico are much more dangerous. Many journalists have been killed there just in the last few years. But yeah, I think this working up of hatred toward journalism or journalists by Donald Trump and others does make it a more dangerous profession. And you were commenting on how you know, it doesn't seem as dangerous here as overseas, and that's true. But I wonder what's going on. I mean, Jim Acosta, I can't imagine what kind of security he must have. Like him, love him or hate him, you know, the targeting of him certainly makes him you know, makes him a target, yeah. And so I would think a lot of those people in that realm are kind of having to consider security.
We're very fortunate for the most part here in the United States, and not nearly as fortunate as our colleagues around the globe, and mad respect to them for what they continue to do. All right, one more down here.
Yeah, so you kind of alluded to it, this rapid succession of big news stories. For example, we have these pipe bombs being sent around, and then immediately on top of that, we have a shooting at a synagogue, and then it just goes on and on and on. How in your industry can you start slowing things down long enough to report on very significant stories, or is it just the chaos that this administration wants to produce, and they're very successful at it?
So the question is, how can we keep focus on big things, big stories, when the news seems to be moving so fast right now with so many different incidents, such as the bombs, the pipe bombs that the one man sent out, and then followed quickly by that massacre at the synagogue. Do you want to?
I just think there probably is some method to Trump's badness in terms of generating scandal after scandal after scandal, simply to keep people distracted and off their feet, and to keep the news media very busy and trying to keep up with all the different things that are going on. And I think there's probably behind many of those things that we're reading about even deeper scandals going on deeper down within the government and what is going on.
Yeah, I mean, so let's assume that the political figures had nothing direct to do with these incidents. I think that newsrooms, especially at our levels, but even maybe at the higher national level, have been hindered, have been diminished, and it's harder to keep, Woodward and Bernstein on Watergate, or let's say they're following the bombings, would keep them on that and not pull them off and have them go to cover the synagogue massacre in Pittsburgh or whatever. There's just not, these days, at least at where I work, there's not as many bodies around to keep on a story.
Yeah. I think, Jeff, wrapping it up? All right, we got to wrap it up. Hey, thank you all for coming out here.
Thank you.
Huge thanks to the Loft for what they do, and to the U of A School of Journalism for continuing to keep young journalists moving along through the pipeline.